Why you avoid conflict as if it were a crime, or chase approval as though it were oxygen. It is not weakness. It is not random. It is programming, written long before you knew what manipulation even meant. What if I told you that the deepest fears, the most stubborn desires, and the emotional reactions you carry today were not born in adulthood? They were engineered in childhood. Not always by cruelty, but almost always with lasting effect. This is not just reflection. This is excavation. A psychological unearthing of your earliest emotional blueprints. Freud called it repression, suggestion, and unconscious association. And once you see these hidden codes, you cannot unsee them. Let us start with one of the oldest tricks: silence. Being ignored as a child felt like erasure. When a parent, teacher, or sibling withdrew love in icy stillness, you did not learn conflict resolution. You learned that you were the problem. The silent treatment was not quiet. It was war without words, and your nervous system recorded it as danger. So now, when someone delays a reply or withdraws, your brain panics. You apologize too quickly. You abandon your truth to restore connection. Freud called this trauma of omission. When the child is given coldness instead of clarity, the mind fills the gap with guilt. And here lies the long-term scar. Presence feels like safety, disapproval feels like threat. This is why, in adulthood, you over-explain, over-apologize, and tolerate silence as punishment. You are not simply afraid of rejection. You are terrified of being ghosted by someone who matters. But here is the truth. The silent treatment never proved you were wrong. It proved someone else did not know how to communicate. And that burden was never yours to carry. Then comes the second trick: rewarding silence. What a well-behaved child, they said. But what they really meant was, what a quiet one. From early on, most children are rewarded not for authenticity, but for compliance. Sit still. Be quiet. Do not disturb. And soon good simply meant invisible. Freud's theory of repression explains what happens next. When a child learns that expression brings punishment, they do not stop feeling. They simply stop showing. Those emotions go underground, hiding in the unconscious. And years later they surface as anxiety, as people-pleasing, as fear of having opinions. This is how you were trained to shrink yourself for harmony. You became the expert at not rocking the boat, even if you were drowning under it. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You agreed when your soul wanted to resist. And you made yourself smaller just to fit in. But let me remind you, being agreeable is not the same as being kind. Being silent is not the same as being strong. Sometimes the bravest, wisest thing you can do is say, "I don't agree with that," and let the discomfort rise. Because growth lives there, and so does your real voice. The third trick is the weaponization of guilt. You're breaking my heart. After everything I've done for you, you should be ashamed. These are not just words. They are guilt bombs strategically dropped into the soft soil of a child's mind. And they work. Because as a child, survival depends on connection. If the cost of love is guilt, you pay it without question. Freud called this superego conditioning. The child absorbs the voice of external shame and makes it their own. So decades later, even in silence, you guilt yourself. You feel bad for resting. You feel selfish for setting boundaries. You feel wrong for choosing yourself. Because guilt became your reflex, your leash disguised as conscience. But here's the reframe. Guilt is not always morality. Sometimes it is just the echo of someone else's unmet expectations. You are not wrong for needing space. You are not selfish for protecting your energy. The true manipulation was never the guilt once used against you. It was being taught to carry that guilt for the rest of your life. Nietzsche once said, "Guilt is a disease of the weak." And perhaps that is the shift you need. To see guilt not as your compass, but as an old script you no longer need to perform. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." These tricks, the silence, the compliance, the guilt, are unconscious forces. But you are not a child anymore. You can name them. You can challenge them. And once they are seen, they begin to lose their grip. So far, we have uncovered 3 of the emotional codes that shape a lifetime. The silence that taught you to over-apologize. The reward for compliance that turned you into a chronic self-editor. And the guilt that became your inner critic. But we are only beginning. In the next chapter, we will unmask how love was turned into control, how approval became a trap, and why you still feel responsible for the emotions of everyone around you. The truth will be heavy, but so will the freedom that follows. As a child, you did not just want love. You needed it, not as luxury but as survival. And those who cared for you quickly learned that love could be used as leverage. Be good and I'll be proud of you. Stop crying or I won't talk to you. Make me happy and I'll love you. These were not just phrases. They were contracts. Agreements you never signed but felt bound to keep. And so you learned the unspoken rule. Love is not unconditional. It must be earned. It must be negotiated. It must be performed. And if you fail, it disappears. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But how could you accept yourself if acceptance was never offered to you freely? How could you embrace your flaws when the smallest mistake cost you warmth? You became skilled at scanning for cues, managing moods, editing your behavior. Your inner compass was not truth. It was approval. This is how love became control. Not the open field where you felt safe to explore, but a tight rope where balance was survival. Smile enough, succeed enough, obey enough, and you stayed on the rope. Slip and you felt the terror of rejection. Nietzsche observed, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." The invisible thread here was approval. It tethered you to parents, teachers, peers, partners. You stayed loyal not to your own heart, but to their expectations. Because if approval was oxygen, disapproval felt like suffocation. The trap is that approval feels like love, but it is not. Approval is conditional. Love is not. Approval depends on performance. Love endures through failure. Approval comes and goes. Love stays. But because you were conditioned early, even as an adult, you chase approval as though your life depends on it. You overwork to gain recognition. You overgive to avoid rejection. You stay quiet when you want to scream. You say yes when every fiber of you wants to say no. Not because you are weak, but because approval still feels like survival. Freud once noted that the superego develops from parental voices that become our own, and that is what happened. You internalize the conditions. You carry them inside you. You hear their words when you rest, when you resist, when you risk being yourself. It is no longer a parent or teacher withholding approval. It is you withholding it from yourself. So even now, when no one is watching, you perform. You clean the house as though someone might judge it. You work late as though an invisible teacher will give you a grade. You smile through pain as though an audience is applauding your composure. Because approval has become your mirror. Without it, you fear you do not exist. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot command himself will always be a servant." And that is the painful truth. As long as you are ruled by approval, you are not free. You are performing for invisible judges, living someone else's script. You are surviving a test that never ends. But freedom begins here. With a terrifying act of disappointing others. With saying no when it would be easier to say yes. With choosing silence instead of explanation. with risking disapproval and surviving it. Carl Jung believed, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. The more you resist your fear of disapproval, the stronger it becomes. The only way through is to face it, to let someone disapprove, to let someone be disappointed, and to realize that their disapproval is not death. It is liberation. Ask yourself this: who would I be if approval no longer decided my choices? What would I do if love did not have to be earned? Whose voice would guide me if silence was not punishment, if guilt was not obligation, if applause was not survival? The answers will not come easily. They will require courage, honesty, and loss. Because breaking free from conditional love means grieving the years you lived as a performer. It means acknowledging that what you thought was love was often control. But it also means stepping into a freedom you have never truly known. So here is where the chapter leaves you. Approval is not love. Performance is not identity. Disapproval is not death. And you are not here to be applauded. You are here to be real. As a child, you did not just carry your own feelings. You carried theirs too. The parent who sighed heavily after work. The sibling who broke down in silence. The teacher who projected their frustration onto you. You learned early that emotions were not private. They were contagious. And somehow you became the caretaker. When a parent was sad, you felt responsible. When someone was angry, you scrambled to soothe them. When a room was tense, you changed yourself to keep the peace. It was never said directly, but the message was clear. Your worth was tied to managing the moods of others. Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And that is exactly what you carried. Their disappointments, their regrets, their unspoken needs. You were a child, yet you lived like a mirror, reflecting and absorbing what was never truly yours. This is how emotional responsibility becomes identity. You stop asking, "How do I feel?" You start asking, "How do they feel and what must I do to fix it?" Your own emotions are postponed. Your needs are silenced. Because survival depended on keeping everyone else stable. But here is the cruel twist. By carrying what was never yours, you grew strong in ways that cost you deeply. You became intuitive, reading the slightest change in tone. You became adaptable, bending yourself to fit whatever was needed. You became dependable, always the one to fix the chaos. But the strength you built was born of self-abandonment. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." By constantly fighting the monsters of other people's emotions, you risked losing yourself entirely. You were so busy managing their storms that you never learned how to stand in your own reign. So now, as an adult, you still carry the weight. You apologize when others are upset, even if it has nothing to do with you. You feel guilty for relaxing when someone else is stressed. You overfunction in relationships, pouring out energy until you are empty. Because somewhere deep inside you believe that if others are unhappy, it must be your fault. But let us pause here. Whose emotions are you carrying today that do not belong to you? Whose anger, disappointment, or sadness sits on your shoulders while your own feelings remain buried? Whose story are you replaying while your own goes unwritten? Freud spoke of transference, the way unresolved feelings move from one relationship into another. That is what happens when you carry emotional burdens that are not yours. You replay the same cycle. You attract people who lean on you because you have been conditioned to hold their weight. You confuse love with labor. You mistake empathy for obligation. But empathy without boundaries is not compassion. It is collapse. It is drowning while trying to keep someone else afloat. And collapse is not noble. It is tragic. Nietzsche said, No one can build you the bridge on which you, and only you, must cross the river of life. You cannot carry everyone else across. Their emotions are their bridge. Their pain is their work. Their healing is their responsibility. To confuse it with your own is to lose the chance to walk your own path. Carl Jung believed that healing comes through individuation, the process of becoming a whole, distinct self. That means returning the burdens you inherited. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with clarity. To say, this was never mine to hold. To give back the sadness, the rage, the unmet needs that shaped you but do not define you. Ask yourself this: if I laid down every emotion that was not mine, what would remain? If I stopped apologizing for feelings I did not create, who would I be? If I let others carry their own weight, what would I finally have the strength to build? You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not selfish for creating distance. You are not heartless for refusing to fix what others must face. You are simply human. And being human means carrying only what belongs to you. So here is the shift. Stop confusing care with caring. Stop confusing empathy with erasure. Stop confusing love with labor. Your life is not meant to be lived under the burden of everyone else's unfinished stories. Freedom begins when you return the weight, when you realize that compassion has room for boundaries, when you understand that the greatest gift you can offer others is not carrying their pain, but showing them how to face it themselves. And perhaps, when you finally lay down what was never yours, you will discover a lightness you have not felt since childhood. The lightness of being responsible only for your own soul. And that is where real healing begins. From childhood, you were taught that peace mattered more than truth, that harmony was safety, that silence was survival. And so you learned to abandon yourself whenever tension appeared. You avoided arguments. You swallowed anger. You softened your words until they had no edge, no weight, no truth. Because conflict did not feel like a difference of opinion. It felt like danger. Carl Jung wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." Your fear of conflict is exactly that. You avoid the legitimate pain of speaking your truth, and in return, you suffer the hidden pain of erasing yourself. Every avoided conflict becomes another layer of self-betrayal. And slowly the person you abandon most is you. Think back. When your parents argued, did you try to keep the peace? When your teacher raised their voice, did you shrink to avoid being noticed? When your friend was upset, did you sacrifice your own needs to calm them down? Each moment carved the same lesson into you. Conflict is catastrophe, and it must be prevented at all costs. But here is the hidden price. To keep the peace, you lose your place. To protect the relationship, you destroy your authenticity. To avoid tension, you create resentment. And resentment is silent poison. It builds in the shadows until it corrodes love, respect, and even your own self-worth. Nietzsche once wrote, "The man who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." That is the danger of chronic self-abandonment. Even when you silence yourself, a part of you knows. It knows you are shrinking. It knows you are hiding. And over time, it begins to despise the version of you that will not speak. Conflict avoidance feels noble. You tell yourself you are protecting others. You tell yourself you are preventing harm. But what you are really doing is trading temporary calm for long-term disconnection. Because relationships without honesty are not relationships. They are performances. And no performance can sustain intimacy. Freud believed that suppressed emotion never disappears. It returns in disguised form. That is what happens when you avoid conflict. The anger you silence leaks out as sarcasm, withdrawal, bitterness. The frustration you bury erupts in unexpected moments. The truth you hide festers into a quiet rage. And the very peace you tried to preserve is destroyed by the emotions you refuse to face. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and conflict is one of those pains. Not the destructive chaos you fear, but the necessary friction that awakens truth. It is the fire that tests connection, the storm that clears the air, the discomfort that forges deeper understanding." So ask yourself, what is the cost of my silence? What parts of me have I buried just to keep others comfortable? What truths have I swallowed that now eat away at me from the inside? And how many relationships have I maintained on the surface while secretly resenting the foundations? The irony is that true peace does not come from avoiding conflict. It comes from surviving it, from realizing that honesty may cause friction, but it also creates trust. That disagreement may spark discomfort, but it also invites growth. That speaking your truth may risk rejection, but it also reveals who truly values you. Nietzsche once said, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." Conflict is not the enemy of love. It is the birthplace of authenticity. It is the moment where you choose between performance and presence. And presence always demands truth. So here is the challenge. Do not confuse peace with passivity. Do not confuse love with silence. Do not confuse safety with self-erasure. The next time conflict knocks, ask yourself, am I protecting this relationship, or am I abandoning myself inside it? Because the truth is simple. If peace requires you to betray yourself, it is not peace. It is submission. And your soul was never meant to live in submission. Real peace is born when you allow honesty to exist alongside love. When you trust that tension will not destroy you but refine you. When you realize that your voice is not a weapon but a bridge. And maybe, for the first time, you will see conflict not as the end of connection, but as the doorway to real intimacy. Shame is not just an emotion. It is an atmosphere. A weight that lingers long after the original moment has passed. It is the invisible voice that whispers, "You are wrong, not just what you did." As children, we do not question shame. We absorb it. A harsh word from a parent. A mocking laugh from a classmate. A teacher's disapproving look. Each moment carved the same message into our bones. You are too much, or not enough. Carl Jung once wrote, "Shame is a soul-eating emotion." And that is what you discovered. Unlike guilt, which says you did something bad, shame says you are something bad. It attacks identity, not behavior. And so you began to hide. You hid your anger because it was labeled disrespect. You hid your sadness because it was called weakness. You hid your joy because it was mocked as arrogance. Little by little, pieces of you disappeared. Until one day you could no longer distinguish between the mask you wore and the person you were. Nietzsche observed, "Every man hides himself behind 100 masks. Shame gave you yours. Polite, composed, productive, agreeable, a carefully curated self that the world would accept. But the price of acceptance was authenticity. The tragedy is that even as you longed to be seen, shame convinced you it was too dangerous. You wanted connection, but you feared exposure. You wanted intimacy, but you dreaded rejection. So you chose the mask, safer but lonelier, visible but unseen. This is why shame thrives in silence. It feeds on secrecy. It grows strongest in the dark. Freud described repression as the banishment of unwanted thoughts and feelings into the unconscious. That is where shame lives, buried, unspoken, corrosive. And yet, it shapes every decision you make. Think about how many times shame has decided for you. You declined opportunities because you feared humiliation. You avoided relationships because you believed you were unworthy. You silenced your voice because you thought it did not matter. And each choice made in shame's shadow shrunk the life that could have been yours. But here is the truth. Shame is not proof of your failure. It is proof of your humanity. Every human being carries wounds. Every human being has moments they wish to hide. You are not broken for feeling shame. You are human for experiencing it. Carl Jung reminded us, "I would rather be whole than good." To be whole means embracing not only your light but also your shadow. It means naming your shame instead of obeying it. It means choosing visibility over performance. It means showing up flawed, vulnerable, and real. The paradox is that the very thing shame tells you to hide is the key to connection. When you reveal your struggles, others see their own reflected. When you admit imperfection, others breathe easier in theirs. When you speak what shame told you to silence, you create intimacy that masks could never achieve. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Your chaos does not disqualify you. It gives you depth. It gives you soul. It gives you the raw material for authenticity. So ask yourself, what part of me am I still hiding? Whose judgment am I still fearing? What would my life look like if I let myself be fully seen, even in imperfection? The work is not to erase shame but to expose it, to drag it out of silence into speech, to say, "This is my story and it does not make me less, it makes me real." Because the only power shame has is secrecy, and once it is spoken, it begins to dissolve. Freedom will not come by perfecting yourself until shame disappears. It will come by embracing yourself until shame loses its voice, by realizing that the very cracks you wanted to hide are the places where light gets in. And perhaps, for the first time, you will understand that being seen is not about being flawless. It is about being true. Control often begins with fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being powerless. Fear of being unseen. And so, instead of admitting the fear, we disguise it. We cover it with rules, demands, and invisible strings that bind the people around us. Perhaps you saw this in childhood. A parent who shouted to maintain authority. A teacher who demanded obedience instead of respect. A friend who manipulated your choices under the mask of care. Control felt normal because it was everywhere. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." That is the essence of control. It is never about love. It is about fear dressed up as protection. The words may sound like concern, but the intention is often possession. Think of the subtle tactics. The parent who guilt you into compliance by saying, "After all I've done for you." The partner who tracked your every move under the label of love. The leader who kept you dependent by convincing you that you could not manage without them. Each was a thread of control woven so tightly you mistook it for care. Nietzsche observed, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." That is the danger of control. The very fear of being powerless can turn you into the one who strips power from others. You justify it as safety. You defend it as order. But in truth, it is fear crystallized into dominance. Freud explained that unresolved childhood anxieties often resurface as adult defense mechanisms. That is what control is. It is a defense. A desperate attempt to manage the chaos inside by structuring the chaos outside. You cannot tolerate unpredictability, so you micromanage. You cannot bear rejection, so you manipulate. You cannot accept vulnerability, so you dominate. But here lies the tragedy. Control never truly gives you what you seek. You do not feel secure, you feel exhausted. You do not feel loved, you feel suspicious. You do not feel powerful, you feel hollow. Because real security does not come from gripping harder. It comes from trusting deeper. Ask yourself this. How many relationships in your life have been shaped more by control than by trust? How many times have you silenced yourself to avoid someone else's anger? How many times have you silenced others to avoid your own fear? Control may protect connection temporarily, but it always kills intimacy eventually. Carl Jung reminded us, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Control prevents transformation. It freezes relationships into roles, the controller and the controlled. There is no room for growth, only performance. No room for vulnerability, only compliance. So why do we cling to control even when it suffocates us? Because letting go feels like falling. Because trust feels riskier than dominance. Because freedom, both ours and theirs, feels too uncertain. But what if uncertainty is the only soil where love can grow? Nietzsche said, "The true man wants two things, danger and play." For that reason he wants woman as the most dangerous plaything. Beyond the gendered language lies a truth. Real connection is dangerous because it cannot be controlled. It is play because it requires freedom. It is alive because it resists domination. So here is the invitation. To see where control has replaced care in your own life. To ask where fear has hidden itself behind rules, demands, and expectations. To notice where you are still reenacting the lessons of your childhood, turning the wounds you received into the weapons you now use. Freedom begins when you release control. When you stop managing every outcome and start allowing life to unfold. When you stop forcing people into roles and start meeting them as they are. When you stop equating obedience with love and start trusting that real love thrives only in freedom. Because control may feel powerful, but it is weakness disguised. Love may feel risky, but it is the only power worth having.